Music makers out there, James Russell here, and welcome to part 3 of Which Door is Right for You. Now, I've already covered Pro Tools and I've covered Ableton, so today I'm doing Logic. As discussed in the other videos, I'm going to do what I consider to be the top 5, which is Ableton, Logic, Pro Tools, Cubase and Reason. Essentially because all of them can use third-party plugins, all of them are pretty complete packages within themselves, and this is going to be a non-scientific review. So let's get into it. Basically, I'll take you through Logic. Okay, so Logic. So I first started off in using PC and using Cubase years ago, and for the longest time I remember all I wanted to do was get into Logic and work on the Apple platform. Then I got an Apple Mac, got Logic, had used Pro Tools over the whole time too, and was dealing with a lot of large format studios, and did a big period of writing in Logic. And Logic is a pretty comprehensive program. It's pretty awesome, especially if you're the kind of person who's going to be working a lot in the box. Let's do a quick little rundown on exactly what are the pros and cons for Logic and who it's best for. Okay, as far as the pro, Logic is a pretty comprehensive workstation. Essentially, the instrumentation that it comes with and some of the presets are just fantastic, and so it's really quick and easy to get a sound up and running. If you want any kind of sound, the sound banks in Logic, all the presets are pretty much legendary classic sounds, and it'll help you pull a sound straight away. And one of the other pros is the plugins. Now, Logic also has great instrumentation, but the plugins are fantastic. They added features like a spectrum analyzer on the paragraphic EQ, which is just amazing. If you want to start learning how to mix, a spectrum analyzer is fantastic. For that, it shows you where in your waveform you've got bits sticking out and what you need to regulate. So it really helps with mixing in that regard. Also, Logic has its own plugin protocol known as Components, or AU. Third-party plugin designers such as Softube and all the rest of it work pretty well with Logic. So yeah, that's definitely a big benefit. Another benefit is the fact that Logic are probably one of the first when it comes to DAWs to innovate and also add new features. This can be definitely seen by the fact that flex time and flex pitch is a big feature in Logic. A lot of the other DAWs have it, but I will note that Pro Tools doesn't. Flex pitch especially means that you don't have to use the third-party plugin like Melodyne to tune your vocals or anything else that you've recorded. Now, because tuning is such a massive feature of music production, I think that's a really good inclusion. As far as the pros is the instrumentation, the plugins and the platform that you can get with the extra plugins and the processing, also the fact of the extra features that Logic has. They're some of the big pros for this program. As far as cons, well, there's really not many. It's one of the leaders here. It's one of the holy trinity, I suppose you would say. The Cubase, Pro Tools and Logic are the big players when it comes to multi-screen DAWs. I would say a little while ago, as far as a con, Logic tried to incorporate everything into one window. I see they've now changed that, and you go back to the old mix window and arrangement window setting, which for me, using double monitors is a really big plus and kind of a necessity. What I would say as far as the cons though, it's a little bit more clunky than Pro Tools when dealing with audio. It's got things like Smart Grid and all the rest of it, but to me it doesn't translate that well when you're trying to do a lot of audio editing or working with multi-mic setups. I do find it a little bit more clunky than, say, Pro Tools. That is where Pro Tools excels. We're working with audio, but it's still pretty good. You can still chop stuff up, you can still quantize it. The loop libraries in Logic are fantastic. It comes with a whole lot of that stuff. But as far as the cons, it's just a little bit clunky when working with audio, or it's just a little bit less ergonomic, say, than Pro Tools when dealing with audio. But the other one is also its I/O configuration. Logic is often used in smaller studios, but as far as the big ones, it doesn't play that well with big conversion, and say you've got 48 channels of converters, it doesn't play that well with that. Essentially, or not as well as, say, Pro Tools and things like large format consoles. Logic has less capabilities to be able to deal with that, although nowadays they still do fairly well when it comes to multi-input converters and the like, but at the same time it's just a little bit more clunky. But it is also a con that you probably won't notice unless you're working in a big studio. The other thing I would say about Logic as far as a con, and it's not really a big one, is with a lot of the sounds that Logic have created, you can almost hear something that's been created in Logic. It has a certain sound to it. Say something a little bit more digital, especially if you're recording in the AIF format instead of WAV. It just sounds a little bit more plasticky to me, but whether that's a con or not, you may really like that, especially if you're doing dance music. That could be a real plus. So who's Logic for? Well, Logic is essentially for anyone on the Mac platform that wants to make music. It is more suited to someone who wants to compose or write music as opposed to mixing. It's probably less intuitive than, say, Cubase or Pro Tools when it comes to mixing, but it's still definitely up there and it's still pretty functional for both mixing and composition. So who's it for? Anyone on the Mac platform, anyone that really wants to get into music writing, especially someone who's used GarageBand and sees the interface and will generally find things, the layout pretty similar. So that is definitely who Logic's for. Anyone who's working in the box and wants to do a lot of composition, whether you're writing EDM or whether you're writing classical, Logic is a fully featured DAW for you. So I hope that helps. That's my little non-scientific review of Logic. Tune in next time for my review on Cubase. And if you like this, hit the like button, hit subscribe, and leave me a comment if you want me to cover a subject on to do with music production. I'm James Russell, and I'll catch you next episode.